Hi everyone, yes, so welcome to another stunning new week. And this week, with our People of Color discussion for this new month, we want to focus on our current generation and what happens in our generation currently, and then also our generation 2000 years from today. I want us to really understand the challenges that we currently have in our generation and how and where we find ourselves at currently in our generation, and with understanding the effect and impact that our current challenges have with us having to move and understand what difference are we making this year that will have an impact on generations 2000 years from today. And when we really discuss that, I want us to understand the importance of this year for our generation, and not only this year, but I'm having to mention this year because this year reminds me. I've mentioned last month of a very specific time and season in my life, and specifically when it comes to our generation, that really have to understand the birth factor of our generation, having to understand the importance of the choices that we make. And my light is not today working with me, but I'm going to continue with having us just there where we want to be mentally, physically, and where we want to be with that approach that we say that we're gonna have to understand, and we're going to have to allow ourselves to really to include the color of our generation. And people of color are all about the color that our generation represents. And with saying that, I want to have us understand the importance when AWOKH speaks about the completeness of a generation, the completeness of the season that we find ourselves at. It is that we are going to allow ourselves to really be not only loyal to what happens in our generation, but to be in the currentness of our generational mindset, to be in our generation currently. And being in our generation currently means that there's a lot of color in our generation currently, that our generation currently speaks of lots of different colors, and the different colors that our generation speaks of requires us to really allow the completeness of all the colors that we understand and that we are being made aware of, that really is happening in our time and in our season. And when we speak about all the colors in our generation, we speak about all the challenges that our generation are currently going through. We speak about what is happening internationally in different countries, right? It's a loud sound that really wants us to not ignore what is happening. I know that we can't many times react on everything that is happening because we really don't know the conversations of what is truly happening around us. But what we can do is really have an understanding of what is really going to be best for our generation, because where we find ourselves at this season is understanding that there is a lot happening, but are we going to allow a lot that is happening to really impact where the atmosphere that is going to be, the presence that is going to be the same ministering presence that we live and exist from, that is going to be here on this earth and part of all creation 2000 years from today, and understanding the impact of what we do this year and this season is that same presence, that same environment that we create in 2000 years from this season. And that is where, even if you are not gonna be part of 2000 years from today and from the season, 2000 years from the season, but your presence is gonna be the same presence that was the ministering presence in our lives. And therefore, I really want us to understand, not only in a spiritual way, but only also understand that the human body does not only exist from the human body. The human body truly are the ministering presence of creation, and the human body truly exists from the ministering presence of creation. And no matter matter where we are on spiritual levels, no matter how our lives are, but what we, with the impact of our generation currently, is truly that ministering presence, that ministering atmosphere that all of us is a part of, that no one can be rejected of, but that all of us is truly, honestly a part of creation. And 2,000 years from today, how is it that our generation responds to that we are being made aware of, that we learn that we do not only live and we do not only exist from where we find ourselves at, is that yes, the human body is the human body, but the presence of truth that the human body exists from and that we communicate from, and every reaction of us is the presence of truth that does not fade away, that is the same truth and the same presence. And therefore our impact during the season is truly having to understand that the atmosphere change that are required is gonna have to be that responsive reaction that every one of us would have to make that choice. And how is it that we are gonna react? How is it that our generation finds themselves at that our part of atmosphere, right? It's almost like creation made us, not only made us part of a certain atmosphere, but it's almost like creation said that your generation owns that part of the atmosphere. But how is it that your generation feels, and how is it that your generation acknowledges that your generation are gonna represent that part of the atmosphere that y'all are part of? So that is where I want us to focus today, and the completeness of understanding the color in our generation. It is that yes, there's a lot happening, but yes, we have empathy and we care for everything that's happening. It is yes, we get angry a lot, but there's also a time that we sit back and that we get to that sober-mindedness, to that mental wellness mindset, that we realize that what I do today, that I don't feel right about it sometimes, and when I don't feel right about it, then I often don't want to do that. That does not make me feel right today, right? It's those choices, those senses that you sense within yourself that you don't ignore, that you ask yourself, that you are, when the day that you are made aware of it, that you feel bad about maybe certain choices and certain things that you do, and that day then it's time for us to maybe take a think and to maybe decide to do better, right? And that's where we see the completeness of how our generation thinks during the season. And when we look at the completeness of how our generation thinks during the season, I want us to truly focus on the completeness of all the colors, right? So all the colors is that there is a part of our generation that are currently moving on, right? That are currently moving forward in life, and that are currently living in the completeness of their color season, right? And their color season is that they are building, that they are moving forward, that they are setting up, that they are in that artistic mindset, that they are really making sure that they are there where the colors in AWOKH colors requires them to be. And then there's a different part of our generation that finds themselves having to walk out of poverty mindsets, right? Out of poverty situations, out of leadership that really keeps us back, where we are part of the generation that understands the completeness of it, right? That understands the completeness of a generation moving out of poverty, the completeness of a generation moving out of abuse, the completeness of a generation moving out of that mindset that we don't really see the requirements of another household, and that we only sometimes focus on our own households. And we are finding ourselves in also that part of generation that really moves on with understanding the requirements of respecting the completeness of our season, of respecting the fact that there's countries in poverty that has decided to not be in poverty moving onwards, right? That has decided to take that leap of faith and to react accordingly, right? That has decided that the leaders are going to lead them in a way that is going to be best for every person in the country, not only for a certain part of the country, but where all the colors are included in this season. And then there's the part of countries that really wants to walk their way onwards with what it is that their countries are busy doing, but then there's the challenges of other influences, right? The challenges where other countries influence the decisions that some leaders are busy making according to their country and according to the requirements of their country. And when it comes to those countries, leaders in those countries that are really in that mindset of understanding that where their country are in this current season, their country are fine, their country are mentally fine, emotionally fine, economically fine, educationally fine, and those leaders need to live in the currentness of where they are at. Because our discussion today is to understand the currentness of our generation, so that we don't find our way moving to a part with our countries that is not in the current mindset and in the current financial state, economic state, and environmental state of the country, but so that we find ourselves moving in the color of our country. And every country's color are gonna be different. It's like every individual's color is gonna be different, and every parliamentary leader in your country needs to have that mindset of that individualization of when we sit in those meetings, what is it that's gonna bring the color together, so that we don't have our generation and our country moving into a mindset of another country, but so that we find ourselves in the currentness of our countries. And when we in the currentness of our countries, we learn to listen to how we can respond to help other countries. So you don't move into that mindset of now going to cause on your country what is happening in other countries, but you move in that mindset of making sure that the colors of your country is this specific color, but how is it that you can better help your country or better help the next country, so that everyone can find themselves in that reactive mindset and in that reactive approach. And that reactive approach requires us to get our thinking right, to get the way that we do things right, to get the way that we understand the color of our generation right, but to get to understand the leadership panel in general, because our discussions are never only about the parliamentary leader, but our discussions include the leadership panel that is leading the country, and understanding that their impact in those meetings are not gonna be to break your country down, are not gonna be to find themselves in the issues of another country, but in how they can help the country by protecting also your own country. So that is the importance of where the color of our generation, the effect of the responses that we have concerning other countries, the responses that we have concerning issues in our own countries, that we don't find our country now where other countries wants also our country, because they are in that mindset of maybe mentally challenged. Now they maybe have to react according to that, but then the leaders in your own country, in the currentness of your country, need to make sure that they protect the current environment of your country. And with protecting the current environment, they need to listen to how can we then help countries with the current prospering state that our country is in. So the help and assistance that other countries require from countries that are currently in a prospering state, in a financial fine state, is that kind of help that you're going to include the way that you have led your country to where it is currently. You're going to discuss it, and you're going to really help countries in poverty in that way, that you would find, that you would learn to know how are those countries also going to be fine during that season. That is the impact, the strength of our generational atmosphere that are required during the season. It is that you're not going to go and find yourself being challenged also, but you're going to help in a constructive way, that you sense within yourself what is the help that's truly required, and how can my country truly now reach out to other countries, right? Because where we are financially maybe fine, we are maybe economically fine, we are maybe environmentally fine. So how is it that we can now help countries that are in poverty, so that the whole world does now not have to go into war, because the one country realizes that certain countries are only working in accordance to where they find themselves at. And the importance of being leaders of our countries are understanding that leaders of the countries becomes leaders of the world. So when the world is in general in pain, then leaders of countries that are prospering and that are financially fine need to find themselves in understanding how they can help leaders in other countries that requires that assistance. It is not to go onto the level, it is not to go and bring harm or to go and bring argumentative discussions into the conversation, but it is to allow our countries to all be fine, because that is why we are country leaders and national leaders, in order to be international global leaders that leads the global nation that becomes part of creation. And creation does not exclude anyone. Whether you are a parliamentary leader, creation requires you to react when you see that brother countries are in pain and brother countries requires assistance. Creation requires humanity to lead in that mindset, that they do not exclude, that they do not close their doors and their ears for what is happening around them, but that they see the visible requirement of why you are a leader in your country. And that is where we find ourselves at, that we can't say that a poverty country now needs to go and make sure that they find themselves out of their poverty. That is not a way that any leader in this world is going to lead any nation moving forward. With that mindset of the current generation, we require our leaders to understand that even though your country is fine, your country forms part of creation. And when creation speaks concerning every aspect of creation. And when creation, the environment, speaks concerning every aspect of creation, creation does not require any country to lock their doors and to laugh about the pain of another country. But creation requires those leaders that is there to be there in the room where they are required to be in every country. And that is the currentness of what is required in having to understand that a generation can either be going into a mental state where there's currently war on the soils of this earth, and in order for everyone in this earth to respond with making sure that we are not here only because of ourselves, but that we are everyone part of the whole room that is part of creation, and that response of the leaders in the season, that response out of poverty in the season, that response out of economical issues in certain countries, educational issues in certain countries, that response concerning women issues in certain countries, that response concerning men that needs to be respected and that needs to be honored also in the house where they are the men leading us as a generation. We need to know that there's a lot of colors concerning how we respond, but there's also a way that we respond in a better way, that we say that it is either that we're going to react and help one another, or we're either going to see the whole world in a mental state. Because when one country is in a mental state, there's the environment that says, but there's other people also that can help, and why are they not helping? And that is why our generational issue in 2022, there is only in certain countries, does not exclude the help of another country. Our generational issues that is currently happening in certain countries, the poverty issues, is not only the poverty issues of a certain part or a certain country, but it is the poverty issue of creation. And when creation is in pain, creation is in pain. And when creation is in pain, everyone else reacts because they can sense the pain within themselves, because they are part of one environment. And when you sense the pain within yourself and you do not react concerning the pain, then the pain mentally challenges you. And when the pain mentally challenges you, it becomes a physical challenge. And when it becomes a physical challenge, it becomes a household challenge. And when it becomes a household challenge, it becomes a community challenge. And when it becomes a community challenge, it becomes a country challenge. And then the whole world finds itself in pain, because there's that requirement of people to react. And that requirement does not mean that you need to be part of my country to react. That requirement means that if you can react, and you know that there's people in pain, and that you know that there's countries in poverty, and that you know that financially you can help, and that you know that you can economically help, and that you know that you can educationally help, then we sit around that management leadership global meetings, and we do that, and we help one another, and we be there for one another, and we don't reject one another. and we don't go and discuss the wars in one country and having to sit and having to now put another part of the area that is in pain also included. But we look at Russia and Ukraine and we help both countries out of it. We need to be in that mindset that you don't only focus on how can you help one country if you don't want to help the other country. That help mindset that our generation are required to be at is how do we help in accordance to making sure that everyone is where they are required to be as a generation that impact of 2,000 years from this season, of 2,000 years from how we're reacting, of 2,000 years that we in the atmosphere and that we react in the atmosphere, of 2,000 years of understanding that my way of reaction is a way that reflects in the environment, and it is a way that someone else would react in the environment. And therefore, when our generation are out there making sure that everyone respects one another, then we're gonna be fine. Then the whole world is fine. Then everyone is gonna be in the complete color mindset that no one excludes no one, and my situation is not better than other ones. So now I only focus on myself, and I only focus on making sure that I'm fine. But when I notice someone else is not fine, I react concerning it, and I make sure that I'm a current leader in my current country and a current leader of a global nation. That is where we need to be at, in the current mindset of making sure that all of those AWOKH colors are there. That AWOKH speaks loudly, that AWOKH does not breathe when she speaks, because AWOKH wants the generational mindset that is required to be mentally, physically, emotionally fine, to all be hearing the loudness of what is required in our season. And whether you tune in and listen to AWOKH on that day, whether you tune in and don't want to listen to AWOKH in that day, it is that mindset, that voice that echoes in the atmosphere, it is that word that is spoken in the atmosphere that is going to have us be fine. And that is where everyone needs to be at in their season, making sure that the preparation for our generation is a preparation for generation 2,000 years from today. How do we prepare for that, right? Where do we find our generation 2,000 years from today? Where is the different impact that we have made in the environment 2,000 years from today? What is that new generational mindset required to the 2,000 years from today, right? That new generational mindset is the something new that AWOKH speaks about, right? The sound that we have written that said something new is happening, but where do we find ourselves at in that mindset, in that physical state of something new? And that is that we are required to understand the impact that we have with what it is that happens around us in our season, and how it is that we can help, so that we don't only see ourselves individuals and parents in our own households, no, so that we understand the parenting factor that becomes that everyday reaction of being a human being. Being a human being, I've only mentioned earlier about the mothers that are on the parenting mindset because I was speaking specifically about women. But in this discussion, I'm speaking to our global international nation. And when I speak to people out there, I want us to understand the parenting factor of everyone, right? I've mentioned earlier that I tuned into Instagram last year when there was the requirement of a generation to honor and respect the men of the house. And I realized that women also required that honored and respect in the house. And I realized that there was a season that women went through pain, but there was also the same season that the men of the house was in pain. And I realized that women was on social media and everyone was educating how they require men to respect them and how they require the equality. And then I stepped in, and then with my echoing of my voice, I really spoke on what was required to set right, because there's a way for us to require change, right? There's a way for us that we say that when we want change, but the word that everyone was on about was the word equality, right? And I said, but what does equality mean to our generation? Because the way woman was echoing was in a disrespectful way towards the men. The way woman was going on, was in a disrespectful way towards the house of the men, right? And the house of the men is that parenting factor. The men becomes the household household breed, right? He holds the house together, right? But how is he supposed to hold the house together if a woman now goes and argues because they want all of the things on the table that they want on the table? And yes, there's going to be everything for every nation, but what the men requires women to do in season is to take a step back, right? When we mention the step back, we require that step back approach, that where we get to that mindset again of honoring our men in the house, of knowing how do you honor the global men, how do you honor our international men, with having to know that yes, they understand what we require them to do, but that honor and that respect, that parenting men factor is that we don't disregard them for being the men of the house. We don't disregard them for what creation has set them there to be. That yes, there's a lot of things that happened, but how is it that we are going to change? How is it that we are going to better our approach in order to get to where our generation requires to be at, with making sure that our parenting situation is fine, so that everyone in our children can find, and everyone in our country can find themselves fine. And everyone, and yes, all the children in our households can find themselves fine, so that we don't find ourselves challenged because men have been disrespected and disregarded, and now they're angry because there's been disrespect and there's been dishonor, and understanding that equality is one word, but it can stir so much anger. It can stir so much things in the environment, because the way that it was brought forth, the way that people explained it, the way that they when they represented that they wanted equality, the anger that it was spoken from really had our generation be where it is today. And therefore, sometimes as women, we're going to have to sometimes take that step back. We're going to have to sometimes know how to say what we want to say, even when it comes to our social pages. There's going to be those ways of education that we know sometimes we get angry and we go out there and we say what we want to say, but there's certain things that you don't force everyone else to go along with how you want to explain something, because equality to me means that you want to be on an equal level of a man, right? And that equal level sometimes means disrespecting the men of the house, right? Because the way that it was explained is that women now wanted every position in the management office, right? And there's certain things that men are there to lead with. There's certain organizations that requires the men of the house to lead the organization, being the men of the house. And those are things that we do not disregard. Those are things that when it comes to words like equality, and we want to explain what it is that we require to do, then we explain it in the completeness of what it is required that we want to say concerning that word, because we, a generation educated that word, but there was so much emotion concerning it, there was so much anger concerning it, there was so much confusion on how it was described, that some men felt disrespected concerning how it is that we honor them as being the men leading this world. And therefore, when we move forward with our pages and what we do, it is really important to know when we really speak to one another, and when we really speak along with what everyone else requires, right? It is when you speak along, you learn to understand the environment trends of when everyone says the same thing, right? Of how is this impacting our nation, right? What impact and what issues came forth when the word equality was mentioned everywhere? What anger was stirred concerning the word equality, right? And how many nations after that discussions, and after those Instagram posts and those Facebook posts about equality, how many anger was stirred in the environment? And could we have had it better today, or was that part of stirring our generation? And therefore, you don't only always say what other people say, but things like the word equality and requiring equality are things that needs to be explained in the completeness of what it means, right? That you understand the fact that there's certain ways of explaining is that when when children goes onto social media and they now go and speak onto this, and they now go into the households and disrespect the parent in the household, disrespect the dad in the household, those are things that change a whole nation, that change a whole generation. And those are things that we really should be conscious about, is those things that we speak along with, because I'm really still concerned about how it was educated. I'm really still concerned about how it was brought over. I'm really still concerned about how our generation then stirred anger and was not educated on the completeness of explaining what is required, rather than having everyone now just stand for that, what woman requires, and having to understand what equality truly means, understand what equality when it comes to certain positions in the offices, when it comes to men that cannot be disregarded with leading in certain areas. And when it comes to when you disregard your men in the office, that man is gonna go home, his wife is gonna disregard because he learns it on social media. The whole community disregards the men, and later the men is almost like nothing to us, because no one of us learns to understand the anger of when we educate and the impact of how it can have on our generation. And therefore I'm really having to really have us understand, when we talk along, what is it that we talk along with? When you also say a word that someone said, do you understand what they meant in the completeness of it, rather than going to also be angry about what you do not know and what you do not yet learn to understand. And when you go and educate a specific word that someone educates, maybe on social media, or maybe a specific word that you have heard someone speak along, you learn to understand, to sense within yourself, what does this mean? What is required with this? And then when you are really an influencer, or you are really a motivational speaker, then you go and in the completeness of the time that we have to speak on our pages, in the completeness you explain what you want to say, so that no one stirs anger, so that no one goes out of the room with misunderstanding where our generation finds themselves at, so that no one goes out of the room misunderstanding woman and what woman truly means, with having to require that equality, and really having to educate our generation on how is it that we approach one another, so that we don't find the generation at war, and then we as human beings have become part of that war that is stirred amongst us. And therefore, that is what I wanted to say about our season of currentness, and how we are going to make sure that where we are at, our generational mindset is right. But when I speak along, I understand what I speak about, and if I realize that what I've posted is not right, there's the interestingness of social media that you can take the post off again. If you maybe log in maybe a time later and you sense that you have maybe talked along with something, or you have maybe been wrong about what you said, then you go in your page, I love to do that, and you delete the post. Because when you don't sense fine with it, then you know you're out of that anger mindset, you're emotionally fine, you take the post off, so that we don't go and stir anger around us. That is what I wanted to say about people of color this month, and where I wanted us to be at. And another thing that I really want to mention is the level that our generation finds themselves at. And that is going to be the conclusion of our discussion of people of color today. It is that our generational level is sometimes misunderstood, right? And when we misunderstand our generational level, it is that many of our generation misunderstand the language barriers, right? That educational barriers that we have. And I always get angry when I speak to people that are educated that disregard me when I speak, right? I have been many times in offices where people did not give me the opportunity because they were on an educational level, and their minds mentally were clustered in that educational level. So when they got into the office, when they realized my skin color, when they realized my hair type, they excluded me. They sometimes didn't want to listen to me because of how they have been educated. And I also want our generation, specifically when it comes to because our social media pages, we still have that advantage of making sure that we are there, right? And our social owners, our social directors, they are really honoring also that of making our generation one. But when it comes to our television stations, our radio stations, when it comes to our newspapers and to how we educate, it is that our generation also have to work on, right? It is that mindset where our generation needs to learn to include on the level that everyone is on. And when it comes to the changes that's required on our television stations and on our our newsrooms, and specifically on our radio stations and our newspapers and how we educate, it is that mindset of the level that the everyday person is on, right? It is our generation is currently on a level where all the colors are there. And when all the colors are in the room, there cannot be any exclusion with disregarding the color in the room, with disregarding the hair type in the room, with disregarding men and women in the room, with disregarding what really is there that is also part of our generation, right? When I also mentioned that we often so much have disregarded the people with mental impairment, we have so much disregarded, how we respect and how we honor and how we include them into our discussions. We have so much, when it comes to our television programs, not included that is so important also, that also forms part of our generations, that also is part of our countries, right? But we need to sometimes learn to do it in a honoring way, in a respectful way, rather than just doing what AWOKH is saying, but in a conscious way of how can you do it so that no one is abused in the room, but so that everyone feels included when the generation really understands the color that they are really part of. That means that they are part of a generation and part of creation that includes all the stunning colors, and that does not exclude, but that also wants us to respect the differences of our generation. And that is where I really want our newsrooms and our television stations and our radio stations to get into that mindset of complete colorness, right? That completeness of color into the room, of not disregarding someone that enters your office because you see them a different skin color and you think that they might not be able to be that the viewer wants to see. You would have to get to understand that the viewer is the honest person in the room, right? And when the viewer tunes in onto television, the viewer tunes in with that honest mindset. The viewer does not disregard what color, what hair type, or anything. And when the viewer sees that even our generational leaders don't see the completeness of color, then it also stirs anger with the viewers that views in onto the television screens, right? And sometimes those viewers are white people. Sometimes those viewers have got everything, but they are living from the honest part of life. And they sometimes also respect everyone in the room, right? Because not to everyone color is gonna be a problem. Not to everyone the hair type is gonna be a problem. There's really some people that are really in their rooms, that are really there with all honesty and with all trueness concerning themselves. And I myself have worked with leaders like that, and I always think Wendy Newton, because Wendy Newton was one of those managers, right? At first, when she came into the office, my mindset was, how is this woman gonna react? Because she's white and she's educated and she's on another level, but is she gonna listen to me also in the room? And I remember having to get into the room and starting the meetings and having to really be in that true mindset, right? And then she was in that true mindset of where she finds herself at. And then she really saw the true and honestness. And then I really respected her for that, right? Because not every manager, especially that comes from an apartheid era and an apartheid time, not every manager is gonna have that open mindset. And I really honor and respect Wendy for that, because then Wendy didn't exclude in the room. Then And when they didn't exclude when she really had to promote us, then she didn't exclude when she asked you for your opinion in the room, right? And that is a generation that where we require our generational mindset to be at, is to really be in that mindset of including every color into the room, of making time to listen to one another and not disregarding one another, but having that true leadership that truly listens, that gives you some time in the room, that truly listens to you, and that truly responds with that honesty. Because we are a generation that lives from honesty, but when honesty is in the completeness of its color, how much more prospering for everyone, how much more prospering to work in an office where there's the trueness of every color in the room, right? The trueness of honesty in our rooms. And that is where I want us to be at, with having to understand the trends in our season, but with having to understand the people of color during the season. It is what we have to say for today. Tune in for next month's discussion, and we're gonna continue on every country and how we can be in that oneness and that completeness of our generation, with not excluding anyone, with not abusing anyone, but with honoring where everyone finds itself at during this season, with understanding that yes, we went through challenges, and yes, there's things happening in our countries, and yes, there's a lot happening around us, but with also making sure that everyone is fine and that everyone is there, that everyone lives from the true honesty, that is the completeness of honesty, that honesty are not disregarded when it comes to a certain area in your life, but that everything concerning our generation is honesty. The stunning trees outside is honesty. The colors of AWOKH is honesty. Everything that AWOKH represents in season, it's that honesty. And that is where AWOKH is advocating for during that season. It is that we find ourselves where our impact is an impact with the complete color of honesty and trueness in our season. Now that is it for today. That is all I had to say for today. May you continue to tune for our next discussion, and be ready to know that we are all there and we are not gonna exclude anyone. Have a stunning People of Color Day further.